Hi, and welcome to the Autism Wine Hour. Today I talked to Mary Ann Hughes from SpecialFamilyTransitions.com. Mary Ann was a special needs mom that found herself going through divorce and took what she learned from that process and turned it into a business to help other parents that were in similar situations. Really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. Okay, we're recording. Welcome to the Autism Wine Hour. I'm here with Mary Ann Hughes. She is the owner of Special Family Transitions, and you're basically a consultant that helps families who are going through divorce with special needs kids, correct?
That's right. I'm a certified divorce coach and also transition coach.
Okay, very cool. And how did you end up in that kind of position?
Well, it's a long story, but one I never expected, I guess, would be my reality and my profession. But I started out on my autism journey with, I've got two sons on autism spectrum. And when I was married about 21 years, I faced divorce unexpectedly.
Yeah,
And so I had to try to navigate that to make sure that my kids and I would be in a good position in the future. And so my intent during the whole process was to advocate for my kids and try to figure out how to do that effectively. Proud to say I did get a good result for my family.
hmm,
I decided that it was so much work, effort, and energy and money
yeah,
that was spent on this whole process when the divorce rate for special needs families is so high. I thought, well, this is
yeah,
kind of crazy that that I had to do this way and that people shouldn't have to recreate the wheel with it being so common every time there's a
yeah.
divorce. I'm trying to find the right resources and trying to figure out what to do. So I decided, okay, I'm going to make it my mission to help other families get through the process in a less costly and stressful manner.
Yeah.
And so that's why I started my very own company for the first time. Became a divorce coach, got certified, went through all kinds of training. I'm in all kinds of divorce organizations to keep improving and learning about divorce and what it takes to help families on the spectrum and other special needs. And so that's what I'm doing now. I help
That's
families
great.
through the process, through the overwhelm, through the complexities, and just whatever they need before, during, and after divorce as well.
Yeah. Well, just from business owner to business owner, like that's really impressive to just kind of look at your own experience and be like, oh, like I kind of figured this out on my own. I think this could help other people. That's really great.
Yeah,
That's
thanks.
that's the way good businesses start, I think.
Yeah, I've got a business background and I have an MBA and I worked in the corporate world before I had kids, but for 20 years I didn't work. My
Yeah.
focus because I was able to stay home and do what I need to do for my kids. So my kid's dad, was able to provide and I was able to do that. So that worked out well for us. But then I was thought, okay, what kind of work can I do? I was thought I would go back to work, but it just never worked out because my kids
Right.
needed so much attention and so on. And so I saw a need and did it not just for a business reason, but just really to help other people. I've got to take all this
Yeah,
experience, I don't want it to go to waste.
for
I
sure.
I learned so much and that I want to give back. And
Yeah.
so I'm happy to be able to do that now.
Yeah, that's great. I love the idea. So I guess I'd like to start just with your kind of personal experience first and then kind of transition to your kind of business that you offer. So so you have two kids on the spectrum?
That's right. So I've got one who's 20, who's on the higher functioning end, and one who's 22, who has more challenges.
Okay. And was there a particular event that led you to like seek out an autism diagnosis back 20 some years ago?
Sure. So with my first son, with him being my first, didn't really know what to look for, didn't really pay that much attention to milestones. I remember looking at the um, what to expect when you're expecting and what to expect in the first year and then as a toddler, and I was like, this book must not be right because I'm
Right.
not able to check these off. And then I just kind of like, I just put it aside thinking,
Mhm.
I didn't put two and two together thinking
Yeah.
maybe I need to get some professional advice. I just said, okay, he's not meeting those, so I'm not going to look at that book anymore. I must not know what
Yeah,
it's talking about.
for sure.
And so then eventually you get to a point where it's like, okay, I guess there's something here I need to investigate.
Mhm.
And I did actually end up going to one of the top neurologists in the city. And he's like, oh, no, he's young. I think he'll grow out of it. Nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
Well, fast forward several months and there were still issues going on. And So then we did finally go to another professional and they get a formal diagnosis at that point. And so, yeah, it was pretty apparent. And what kind of drove me to that was I remember him being a Mother's Day out, and they said, he's been taking his finger and going around the wall like the whole time, the brick wall. I'm like, nobody said anything to me earlier. So it was kind of
Right.
disheartening. And that's
Yeah.
when I realized, okay, we need professional help. We need to give him a special school setting where they'll actually be able to work with him and help him grow and not just have him sit there and
For
not even
sure.
tell me there's an issue till the very last day of the session. So that was
Yeah.
a little tough. So my advice for people is to definitely stay engaged and, stay on top, even if it's information you don't want to hear, and you don't want to be in denial, kind of like I was, or maybe didn't ask the right questions. So definitely take a proactive stance.
For sure.
Yeah. And then for my other son, he was totally different. And so, oh, okay, fine. So, we don't have challenges here. And then I remember having some kind of FaceTime call with, actually, it was an ABA provider that was going to evaluate my older son. And my younger son was in the background, and he was doing things like turning light switches on and off and things like that. And she goes, well, your younger son, you might want to look at him too to see if there's
Yeah.
anything going on with him. And so we did diagnose him earlier. And as I mentioned, it wasn't as severe and the symptoms weren't as obvious to
Hmm.
someone like me, maybe to someone professional, they were.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but he's done real well. He got much earlier intervention.
Yeah.
And
That's great. That makes a big difference.
it does.
Yeah.
And they're very different as well. But they both come a long way. So I'm real proud of both of them.
That's great. So what kind of going back to like when you initially got that news, like what was that like? What kind of emotions kind of does that bring up, or like how do you kind of overcome from a blow like that?
Yeah, it was a big shock and it was a big blow because as you're, young in a marriage, you have hopes and dreams for what your life is going to look like.
Right.
And then that is no longer the reality. You've got a whole new life, a whole new, different, dreams. And
Hmm.
it takes a while to get to that point. And there's a whole thing that I talk about as well with the grief cycle, where it takes a while to get to the acceptance phase. But the very
Yeah.
first thing, in that is that you're in denial and there's anger and there's bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And so for some people, it takes a long time to get through those phases. Some people never get past certain phases,
Yeah.
or sometimes you may revisit them again, depending on what's going on in your life or your child's life. But yeah, it was a very hard thing to go through. I remember um, my husband at the time, we would, talk about it and how it was difficult. And what we did, though, which I've learned since then wasn't the right thing to do, is we would have conversations about my son in front of him.
Hmm.
And, thinking he's just little, he can't understand.
Yeah.
Well, you realize later, because I had a friend of mine who told me once her son started speaking, he was saying, Mom, I remember when you used to talk to teachers or talk to dad that I could understand what you're saying and it was
Yeah.
hurtful. And so I would caution and advise your listeners that if they are going through a lot of emotion and hard times, whether it's about them and dealing with the school or whatever it might be, do not have those discussions in front of your child,
Yeah. That's
even though
good.
they may
That's
not
really
be
good
verbal.
advice. Yeah.
They may understand. Yeah.
Was there any kind of like particular mindset you had that you think helped carry you through that kind of grief cycle? Or were you just kind of like open to whatever kind of came when it came?
That's a good question. So I like to think I always have a positive attitude and want to hope for the best. And that was, I think, what carried me through. I knew that I would get through it somehow. I knew it wasn't an easy process, but it would take me being active and proactive as a
Yeah.
parent to make sure that my son did get um, a good result in the future as best as we could, right? I mean, there's always
Yeah.
challenges, there's always something that we want to address, but you've got to have the outlook that things can and will get better. Because if you have a defeatist attitude, you're never going to make any progress and just,
Yeah. You're beat from the start.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So you always want to have the highest hopes and have high expectations. I know, especially with the schools, I would always, I'm not sure if challenge is the right word, but I would advocate for more, higher goals and
Mhm.
to encourage him more to set the goals at a higher level. Because if you keep things down low and have lower expectations, that's all they're going to aspire to. That's all they're going to
Yeah.
reach. And so I always go a little higher because I know he can do it. And if he can't, then that's okay. Then we can bring it get back down. But definitely, shoot for the stars.
Yeah, that's great advice. So how have you balanced the demands of being an autism parent with your kind of own self-care needs and other family members? Like,
That's a great question because I think as special needs moms, we tend to put our needs last a lot of the
mhm,
time. I know I did, and I can tell you that wasn't the right way to go. I mean, granted, especially when the kids are young, you feel like you got to do so much for them.
yeah,
Unless you're taking care of yourself, you can't take good care of others. I learned that the hard way in my divorce. That was a wake up call to me to say, okay, well, I've been parenting this way and being this kind of person. And obviously, it's not working for me or for my family. And so that was really the turnaround where then I started taking better care of myself, eating better, exercising, kind of have new attitudes, open to new learnings. And that
yeah,
really helped me to grow and develop. So, yeah, I would say definitely make time for yourself. You may not seem like you have the time, but bring the other parent on board. Maybe a lot of times the moms may feel like they have to do everything, and that's not always the case. Offload some to dad if he's in the picture, or to other caregivers, or sometimes even find other caregivers. A lot of times we're reluctant to find sitters because we're
yeah,
afraid that no one can handle our son or our
yeah,
child like we can, or that there's too many behaviors to try to find someone who can handle that.
mhm,
The reality is there are people out there who are willing, who have the experience, who have the expertise or the willingness to learn to be able to do that. And so if you do that, you can offload yourself, you can make more time for yourself, and also make more time to spend perhaps with your significant other or friends or whatever brings you joy. Because if you're just spending 100% of your time with that child, it's probably not the best situation for either.
for sure. Yeah. So how did you go about finding support and resources for your family, and how have they been helpful throughout your journey?
Yeah. So at first, I was relying on my parents. And when they were young, that was okay. But when they became older and had more challenges, and my parents got older, that wasn't really realistic anymore. And so I was lucky. I remember one of our first sitters was a teacher at a school that we were at. So she was able to come sometimes and babysit or spend a few hours. Sometimes we'd be home, sometimes we wouldn't be home. But I think it's good as a transition, especially if you're not comfortable with somebody taking care of your child. Bring somebody in, and you can be at home, and that way the child gets used to the whole idea of somebody else, being in charge or
Yeah.
being there, even if you are not there. So we did that, and there was one color girl, young lady, woman now, that we knew since she was in high school. I was remember trying to find somebody, and I reached out to a church, to a special
Mhm.
needs ministry. So I'm looking for somebody that needs some help. And so they recommended somebody, and she was literally in high school, and she was volunteering in the special needs class over there in
Yeah, that's
in her high
great.
school program. Yeah. And so she had some experience, and she was comfortable, like, oh, yeah, no big deal. And she was real fun, and the kids liked her. And to this day, she still helps us. And now she's been through, college and working now, and she still helps us out. So I think it's rare to find someone like that you can maintain that kind of relationship with
Yeah, yeah,
over
for
the
sure.
years. But the point is, you never know where you're going to find somebody. And if you find somebody, then definitely value that relationship and nurture them. She's like a family member
Yeah,
too.
that's great. That's a big help for people to have for sure.
Yeah, but I found people also like through like care.com and things like that. And some
Mhm.
have worked out and stayed with us a while, and some it's not the right fit. So
Yeah.
we'll try different things.
In care.com, that's like there's like a review system. So you can kind of, you know, shop for people that have experience based, and you can read the other people's experience. It's similar to like an Airbnb for childcare, correct?
Exactly. For
Yeah.
childcare, and there's the criteria you can filter for those that have special needs experience. You can filter by how close they are to your home, perhaps
Yeah.
as well. And then what you also want to set up phone calls with them, and maybe have them come for a trial visit or meet them in person, because you may come and they may come and realize it's
Yeah.
not a good match. And
Yeah.
even after a few visits, you decide it's not the right thing, or some people have just stopped coming because they decided
Mhm.
too hard or whatever other reason. So it's
Yeah.
always good to have more than one or two at a time. I did find somebody else as well that we work with now, but now she's going to start a graduate school program, and so her time's gonna be more limited. So it's always
Mhm.
good to keep on the lookout for people that may be willing. But I think people at schools, and even like um, psychology programs, ABA programs, people like that, may have some free time and can help
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. That's great advice. So, what ways have you tried to foster communication and relationships between your child and their social networks? Has that been something that has been difficult, like having them interact with peers or kind of get off and do their own life? Like, how does that look, and what do you advise others to do?
Yeah, so for their social networks,
Hmm.
yeah. So with my older son, yeah, he's more limited in his social ability, but he does enjoy being around people in groups. He's not one that can. When he was younger, he did more of the parallel play instead
Yeah.
of the interactive play. And so, for instance, it took me a long time to do it. In this past year, last year was the first year we actually signed up. Was like Special Olympics. So it's
Okay.
something that's his school environment with some students from his class, but yet it's something like an extracurricular activity that they can do. And so that's kind of fun where I went and watched him last week and he was happy to have me there and he was enjoying the activity.
Yeah.
And so
That's great.
it's not, yeah, so it's not the typical kind of social interaction, but it's an opportunity to, be with people that or
Hmm.
people that you might meet and do something fun. We have a group of um, friends that we've known since my son was little, when he was in a special program, a special classroom. And so the moms and I have stayed close. And so every so often we'll put together, be invited to each other's events. And that's a way to kind of have a nice network of
Yeah.
friends that they can look forward to, even if they're not interacting and talking to each other, they're just there and they know us, and the parents can relate. And I think that's
Yeah.
important, parent support.
No, I think it's important to look for those kind of opportunities for sure, especially in like settings that you can be kind of comfortable with. How about what's your experience been with the educational system? Have you had to advocate for your kids through them, and what advice would you give to new parents kind of going through this?
Yes, I've smiled because I've advocated a lot over
Yeah.
the years. So for both my boys, we've done a combination of public school, private school, ABA, all kinds of therapies. And so, and actually presented recently to a diagnostician conference. And my approach there was to share from the perspective as a mom in terms of what we go through, our parents who have kids with disabilities, and so that we can have better relationships with the schools. Because
Mhm.
it's a lot of times parents or teachers, or not teachers, but the school may think it's an us against them approach, and it's not meant to be that, and it shouldn't be that. Granted, you
Yeah.
may feel like that sometimes. It's important to know what your rights are and what you can ask for. A lot of people don't know that they can ask for certain things or do certain things, or get information early, prepare for ARD meetings. But find ways to work together with the school and with the people involved in your child's planning and future, and then you'll get a much um, better situation. So, for example, it took me a while to figure this out, but what I started doing for my IEP objective type setting sessions,
Hmm.
rather than showing up and having a document presented to me, we call them ARD meetings, at the IEP meeting, I would request meetings several weeks ahead of time before I knew this date was coming for the meeting, and plan together, work together to jointly develop the goals. So that way, by the
Yeah.
time you get to that meeting, everything's already agreed upon. So it's a
Right.
give and take on both sides. A lot of people don't know that they can do that and have the right to do that and should do that, honestly.
Yeah. That's really smart. And then it sounds like you're trying to be on the same team to kind of have the same shared goals rather than kind of be fighting with the school system on what you want to see.
Exactly, because they want the best thing for your child too. They may come
Yeah.
about a different approach, but if you understand that they want the best thing and you want the best thing, how can we get there together? And what's a realistic but yet a stretch goal? Like I mentioned, you don't
Hmm.
want it to be too little, but something that we can work towards that, with the right supports can be attainable.
Yeah. So, what was the role of therapy or other interventions in your family to kind of make progress with the behaviors from autism?
Yeah, so we've tried different things over the years. We've done speech, OT, horseback riding, um, kind of DIR, four-time therapy, ABA a little bit. So I think, try different things, see what works for you in your family. Some things work better than others,
Yeah.
but yeah, definitely you can't do this alone. You've got to have different supports. Hopefully you have insurance that covers these.
Yeah.
Things are out of pocket and you've got to decide, do you want to spend the money now as an investment so that they'll have hopefully less needs in the future. So it's all balance and trying to figure out, time wise as well. I know some parents, all they do when kids were younger, and they may still do it, is run around town driving them from therapy to therapy. Well, that's exhausting
Mhm.
for the parents, exhausting for the child too.
Yeah, it's tough.
Sometimes we all need time to just relax and decompress. So kind of think about that in terms of how it's affecting your other family members as well, because we do want to help that child with a disability, but we don't want to um, kind of not focus or consider the needs like a sibling might have who's neurotypical, or even one that's not, or
Right,
the family, and making sure there's enough time for everyone to have quality time
for
together.
sure. So I guess this definitely applies to you because your kids are like in the adult age. How's the process of finding the right balance of support and independent with the child with autism? Like
That's a great question.
how do you encourage them to be more independent while still keeping them kind of in situations they're comfortable in?
Sure. So for my older one who's more involved, he'll never be independent. So, but I am trying to teach him more independent skills. And that's something that really struck me a few years ago as he's in high school and aging out, that they are getting older. There's fewer and fewer resources, it seems like, out there, and less supports, I guess, from
Yeah,
schools and so on as they get older. And so to find ways for them to work on their skills. So now, whereas before I felt like I did everything for him, now he's trying to do more because he knows that he can, because been given the opportunity. For instance, his favorite thing is laundry day. He'll ask every day, when can we do laundry again? In his own words,
mhm,
use that many words in a sentence. But for him, he knows that it's a task and a chore that has to be done, and he enjoys that. Granted, he's kind of perseverating on it a little bit, but at least something that has to be done. And so it may take longer to get through the process, but he's developing independent skills in terms of he's taking the basket, he's putting the clothes in there, he's bringing it downstairs, he's starting to sort.
yeah,
So all those little things, and turning on the washer. So granted, I don't have to supervise, but it's things that several years ago I did all of that work.
mhm,
So and it gives him, I think, a level of confidence and satisfaction that he can do some of these
yeah.
things.
That's great, and you're making good progress. So I mean, that's what I think is important. Just keep making that positive momentum somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. And for my other son, he's got more skills, and so he's come a long way as well. We found for him a college programs that was set up for students with learning differences, and so that's been a great way for him
Yeah,
to
that's great.
learn skills and gain more independence as well.
Very cool. So what would you say has been like the biggest challenges you've run into in your parenting journey with kids with autism?
Yeah, I would say my divorce is a big challenge,
Yeah,
and to figure out how to navigate that, how to get through it, how to support my kids through it, how to support myself through it.
yeah, yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, yeah. So that was a big thing.
So what did you figure out? Like how did you navigate it successfully?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in looking at divorce, some people um, look at that as an end. And it takes a while to get to this point, but you have to think of it as a beginning of something new and something to look forward to. So whether it's for you or for your kids, know that there's life after the divorce process, and that we want to set ourselves up for success in the future. And
Yeah,
so especially when it's a child with disability or special need that is not going to go away and not going to miraculously stop at age 18, you
yeah,
know when other kids are become independent. You have to plan for that. You have to plan for what their needs are now and what they will be in the future, so that as part of the divorce and the discussions and how you're going to address the kids' needs, those things are taken into account. And that's why my divorce was so long and was so complicated, because I didn't see it as just a divorce. I saw it as I have to plan for my kids' futures. And
for sure.
that was the approach I took. And I think one that we need to take,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
it's
there's just a
different
lot of extra factors involved with a divorce with a special needs kid that you just have to take into account.
for sure.
So, so how would you advise someone stay positive throughout all those challenges? Like how do you kind of keep moving forward?
Yeah. So, have a goal and have people get overwhelmed by everything they have to do, whether it's divorce or planning for your child's future or whatever it might be. And so know that there's people out there to help you, whether it's coaches or special needs planners or people like yourselves at different educational or therapy or different type settings that are there to help you along the journey. And so just take one step at a time. Know that every step is a step, hopefully in the right direction, and look at the wins. You know, it's hard to plan from one year to the next. Every year, it seems like every year from when my kids were in school, I'd have to reevaluate, and every few months sometimes, because what is the next step?
So what would you say you have learned about yourself or your parenting style as a result of your experience from parenting a kid with autism?
Well, that we're very resilient. We have to be. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of people get bogged down and get burnt out as caregivers because they're not sometimes making time for themselves. So know that um, we want to do the best we can for our kids, but if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be the best parent that we can be, and we're not going to be a good role model for our
Yeah.
kids. They're looking to us to see how do we act or how do we react in a situation. I think it's really important that we maintain a positive attitude so that they too can have that.
Yeah, that's great. So what advice would you give a parent whose kid was just diagnosed with autism?
Yeah. So just take it one day at a time at first. Um, you may have had dreams for your kids and plans for your future, and those that life is different now. But it
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's a bad life. It just means it's a different life. And there's great networks out there. There's great people who can support you, people who've been down that road. So definitely join groups, whether they're online, in person, get some help, get some direction as to what you need to do to take the steps that you need to. Some people don't know that um, people like myself exist or different resources. I even, to this day, I still go to these conferences and resource fairs. I'm still learning about all the different things that are out
Yeah.
there. There's so much that it just takes um, just learning a little bit every day, connecting with somebody new to learn about these things. And so from the very beginning, I guess another important piece of advice that I'm not sure how it is in your state, but here setting up for Medicaid waivers is a very long waiting list.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't really stressed, or I didn't really understand the importance of it early enough. So definitely get on lists and programs early, even if you don't need them in the future. You want to try to sign up early. Some people are in denial, maybe that their kid is going to get better and they won't need these services, but you never know.
Right.
And so, in speaking about denial, we talked about that a little bit before, but we want to get everybody on board. We want to get, and sometimes different family members have a harder time with
Mhm.
accepting the
For
diagnosis,
sure.
whether it's the dad or a grandparent or even yourself. But we're not doing anybody any favors by doing that. Granted, it hurts to think this is not the person, this is not the dream that we
Yeah.
had, but um, but by working through those emotions, I mean, granted, it's all normal to have to be upset and be in denial and to be angry and to be depressed and upset about this. But it's only to the point we get to the point of acceptance that we can actually make progress for ourselves and for our
Yeah.
kids and plan for their future.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something I run into a lot with running an ABA company is people will email and be like, hey, I'm having these issues. Can you help me? And normally for insurance to pay for ABA, you need an autism diagnosis. So that's like the first step. And there's a lot of parents that are just like, oh no, I don't want to do that. Like that's, you can kind of tell they're not like ready for that yet. And they're doing it like they're missing out on opportunities to really make the best impact with their young kid sometimes. It's I think it's something really important for people to kind of get over, or at least work on getting over as quick as they can.
Right, and then the whole issue of accepting is difficult. Not
Yeah.
just when they're young, but also as they're older. Where depending on the age of your audience, I'm sure it's all different ages. But here in Texas, at age 14, they start talking about transition plans. Well, I
Mm.
can tell you, as a parent of a 14-year-old, the last thing on my mind was planning for the future. I was still trying to get through daily behaviors
Yeah.
and academic
Yeah.
issues and things like that. And so, but keep an open mind. We eventually we do need to start planning for our kids' futures. And sometimes parents, aren't ready to hear those kind of things, but just start looking at the possibilities. Just, for me, I was kind of forced into the whole transition process because of my divorce. So I did it,
Mhm.
had to do everything at one time. I had to plan for divorce and plan for transition and plan for the future all one fell swoop. And so that made me go out there and visit different programs, look at different opportunities, find a good fit for each of my kids, which were very different in terms of what would work and what would not, and maybe readjust some expectations. And so I think the sooner we start thinking about the future, the better we'll be. Granted, we want things to get better, and my kids have made tremendous progress over the years, and yours will too. But it takes planning and it takes commitment and it takes being open to what lays on the other side of that
Yeah.
in terms of
Where
what.
would you advise people who are starting to think about a transition plan? Where's a good place to start to look for information on that for what might work for them?
Yeah, so every school, at least in high school, has a transition counselor. So I would connect there to start out with resources, but there's so many different organizations. As I mentioned, resource fairs is a great way to get information. Um, there's different nonprofits, there's different all kinds of transition specialists out there as well. So there's a host of different ways to get information, and I'm happy to connect people with some resources as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Great. Well, that was pretty much all I had for your personal kind of insight. I thank you for that. You had some pretty good wisdom to pass on. I'd like to kind of get into your professional services. Um, so again, you're just discovered there's this big need for advocates of people in your situation, and you learned a lot in your situation. You just wanted to kind of help other people who are in similar spots. So, what are some of the unique challenges that parents of special needs families face when navigating the complexities of a divorce?
yeah, so as I mentioned, you want to plan for their future, and part of that is finding ways to do things and setting up um, plans for the future that are not going to negatively impact them later on down the road. So,
Mm.
as an example, I don't want to get into too much detail now unless you want me to, is that it's important to have the divorce decree and find a lawyer who's familiar with special needs issues, has experience there, so they can put things together in the wording in such a way that you're not going to be negatively impacted in the future. So, for instance, I'm referring to um, future government benefits you might get, like SSI or other monies that may be coming to that child or adult as they're
Huh.
older. But if they have certain money in their name or getting child support if they're over a certain age, then that may disqualify them from getting those
Mm.
things. Sure. So you want to be real careful about that, kind of
Yeah.
a long-term view of that. Um, and you want to set up maybe a trust. It could be uh, if you're going to set up like life insurance for your family,
Mhm.
whether divorce or not, you don't want money going to their name or inheritance going in their name. So you want to set up a third party trust and have that listed as a beneficiary as opposed to your child. So if you don't, especially if you don't know if your child is going to need those benefits in the future or what their prognosis is going to be, which we don't know, right?
Yeah.
Um, then go ahead and set up the trust. And if you don't need it, then you can make arrangements
Yeah.
otherwise. But we don't want to be in a situation where all of a sudden the child has a lot of money in their name and then they're not going to be able to qualify for
Right.
benefits and you get benefits.
Yeah, I wouldn't even have thought of that. Like that's really important. Is that something that varies state to state, or do you work with people in different states also?
That's a nationwide thing. So yeah,
Okay.
I can work with people no matter where they're located. So I have
Okay.
clients across the country, and for sure, but there's special needs planners, there's special needs financial people, and the state attorneys that understand this. And then the laws may be a little bit different state to state, but there are things you want to consider as well. One of the other things you want to think about is when the child gets older. This is just a divorce thing, but as they transition become adult, then you want to look at different arrangements for when they do become 18 or the age of emancipation in your state, as they call it. So it could be guardianship, it could be other alternative type arrangements, but like the school and doctors, they're going to work directly with the child and not with you if you don't have the right paperwork set up. So kind of think about that down the road.
Yeah.
And then also, if you are getting divorced, know that if you're, and this once again, this may differ state to state, but some states have longer duration for child support. It may be indefinite, meaning lifelong in your state, or it may be, age greater than typical age if you have a disability. So definitely keep good records of your child's disability. Like you said, you want to get a diagnosis for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
And one of those is to show that if you, need to, as part of a divorce, that your child does have a disability, and that needs to be
Mm.
taken out as part of the divorce.
Yeah. That'd be really, really beneficial. So what are some examples you kind of advise people to do? Like, divorces can get pretty heated. How do you help people work together through this to have like shared goals?
That's a great question. So divorces can be heated, and the ones that are more heated are the ones that end up taking longer and costing more.
Hmm.
And no one wins in that usually, because then that's money that could be going towards the child and their
Yeah.
therapy and their future. And so what I would suggest is having the parties work together, put the child first instead of being angry or whatever the other party did or didn't do. Think about, this divorce, because you're going to have to co-parent, as they call it,
Yeah.
for the rest of their lives, right? It's not just, the child's going to be 18 and you'll be done. That child's going to need ongoing support, most likely from at least one, if not hopefully both parents.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out, how can we best meet that child's needs? That's what I was talking about kind of look ahead, figure out what they might need. And granted, when they're 3, you don't know what it's going to be like when they're 21. But just say, okay, well, if this were to happen, then this is what they would need. How would we together address that? How would we pay for it? Who would, who's going to take care of them? Because you want to think about these things, in the early part of the process, as opposed to fighting over it later, because you want to make this as seamless as you can for the child. And granted, it's going to be a lot of change and transition for that child.
Yeah.
And we know autism have a hard time with change and transition, but we want to try to minimize that in so many different ways. And so yeah, put the child first, figure out how you're both going to get through that and work together to help the child. Two don't have to get along,
Mhm.
don't want to, but there's reasons for divorce. But know that no matter what, even if you're not divorced, that child is still looking to both of you to be their parent and to help them with whatever they need.
Yeah. So besides hiring someone like yourself, is there any other kind of resources you would point parents in that could maybe give them some advice, or I don't know, some positive kind of steps to make a good plan for a divorce?
Sure. I mean, I have tons of free resources on my social media. All of it's under Special Family Transitions. I do have a short 1 hour course about success in divorce, kind of what you need to know. And I think that's a
Okay.
real good step. But there's also other kinds of co-parenting specialists out there, all kinds of resources out there that people can read about. There's um, some great co-parenting specialists and books out there that I can definitely point people to if they reach
Yeah.
out to me.
Yeah, that'd be great. So how do your parents balance managing the stress and emotional impact of a divorce with supporting the needs of their special needs child? That seems like it'd be really tough to have all that extra stuff going on and still having this this extra kind of responsibility of having the special needs kid going on.
It is, and that's why taking care of yourself is so important, as we mentioned before. There's a lot of stresses during divorce for you and for the child, and if you're not making good choices, if you don't have someone to help guide you or a support system, it's going to be difficult to
Yeah.
get through divorce, make good choices, to think rationally as opposed to just emotionally and spur of the moment type decisions, as opposed to thinking about them in a rational manner. And that's
Yeah.
where people can help that. But yeah, definitely find ways to support your children. One thing I did for my kids to support them, to help them with the transition and the idea of divorce, is I create a social story. So I'm sure you're familiar with
Yeah.
social stories and what families with autism are, and I've used them in the past for um, getting them ready for vacations, different changes in our lives, things what to expect to reduce anxiety. And that's what I did for my divorce. I couldn't really find, it was hard to find professionals that could help me to
Yeah.
help my kids. And so that's one thing that I came up with that was a big help. and a lot of professionals now, of course, do recommend that as well, is to, in a positive fashion and in a level and language that your kids can relate to, kind of explain what's happening, what it might look like at the parents' home, support them, let them know that they're loved by both parents, but yet things are going to be different. And this
Yeah.
is kind of what to expect and maybe what the schedule might look like. Because they would just want to know, where they're going to be. Are they in mom's house, dad's house? How is this going to affect them? Are they going to be at the same school? Just questions that they have. They don't have to do with mom and dad, but just basic questions about their security and their day to day.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some of the big mistakes you see parents making that going through this undertaking of going through divorce with a special needs family?
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest mistakes, and alluded to this earlier, is kind of fighting about a lot of things about whether it's money or say I want 50% possession time or whatever it might be, when really we should look at what's in the best interest of the child. What kind of schedule is going to make the more sense? Does it make sense to, every couple of days switch homes for that child?
Yeah,
Probably not. Because there may be arrangements that in your state maybe work for a neurotypical child, but maybe it's not the best answer for your child. And so look at that, talk to your lawyers, talk to your spouse or soon to be ex-spouse, or if you're already divorced, maybe try to, relook at the arrangements. Say, how can we both make this work for our kids so that they have the least transition and anxiety over the
yeah.
process.
So what kind of proactive steps would you advise parents take to kind of maybe work on their relationship or maybe prevent divorce? Like, is there any kind of, I don't know, things that you've seen throughout your experience or like personally, like, oh, I wish I would have done this or that to kind of, help avoid all this extra trouble in the first place?
Right. And so I remember when I was a young parent and had kids newly diagnosed, you'd hear these scary statistics about 70 to 85% of families with special needs get divorced. Like, oh, that'll never happen to us.
Yeah.
Well, it's a high number for a reason because it does happen to a lot of people. And
Yeah.
so my goal is for that not to be, not to happen. I'm not promoting divorce, but I'm helping people who are facing divorce, right? A
Right.
lot of reasons for divorce. But like you said, maybe there's ways that people can work on things to maybe not be in that position. And one of those is maybe both being on board with the diagnosis and being an active participant in raising that child and helping the other parent out.
Yeah.
We talked about burnout. There's one parent, if they feel like they're doing everything, then that's hard on that one parent, and the other
For
parent
sure.
like they're not included, right? We don't know what what goes on with the other dynamics. So I would say bring in the other parent, have them help, have them involved, have them learn about the disability if they haven't already done so, have them involved in school meetings and training programs and things like that, so they can both be on the same page as to, okay, this is the reason that we're doing this therapy, or my child's being a certain way, and how can we help, whether it's behaviors or other challenges that we're
Yeah.
facing. So getting both people on board, but also making time, as I mentioned, for all the family members and all the relationships and dynamics that are important to you. So yeah, some people, would like more time maybe as a couple. I would say maybe, make time for date night.
Hmm.
I was at an event recently and they said, well, we haven't had a date night since we got a diagnosis. And that was, 7 years ago. Well,
Yeah.
that's hard. And so that does lead to a lot of issues, down the road. So yeah, find time. We talked about finding caregivers and respite providers, or even places where they have respite opportunities for a few hours, or just
Yeah.
whatever it might be, so that you can have some time alone or with your significant other, or even with your friends. That's, I
Yeah.
think,
I would
just
advise, it's something we do at Shining Stars, my ABA company, is we do a parents night out every quarter. And I'm surprised at how many parents don't take advantage of that, where we just have our staff kind of, watch the kids for a couple hours so the parents can go out. So I would advise anyone listening to check with their ABA company or reach out to see if there's anything like that going on, to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think that's great that you're doing that. I think people, like I said, are hesitant to leave their child with somebody
Yeah.
else. But if it's somebody that they trust and they're there during the day, then it's a perfect opportunity for
Yeah.
them to leave them with you for a few hours. So maybe try different times of the day as well. Maybe evenings are harder, maybe during the day, whatever. I guess that may conflict. But yeah, definitely, I would definitely encourage your parents to take advantage of that.
Yeah. Well, that's it for my questions. I really appreciate you coming on. You had really interesting kind of insight to talk about. I think people could probably get a lot of value from. So hopefully there's some listeners out there.
Okay.
Yeah, this was really great. Thanks a lot.